Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming, and I'd also like to thank Thomas and Headlight for inviting us here. My name is Tim Raines. I'm the Security and Compliance Lead for EMEA for Amazon Web Services, and it's an honor for me to be here with you guys today. Thank you very much for coming this morning. I'll just go to the next slide. Just give you a little background on myself. So I started my career in public sector. Actually, you can tell from my accent, I grew up in London, right? No, I grew up in Canada, born and raised in Canada, worked at the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Department of Justice in Canada, moved to the United States many years ago, spent almost 20 years at Microsoft, so I was their Global Chief Security Advisor for many years. And now I'm based in London, and I get to work in EMEA and come to places like Stockholm to talk with you. So again, thank you. And today's a first for me. I had no idea when I woke up this morning that I would come to this event and learn about the relative risk of a bear attack using a solar system analogy. I didn't see that one coming. I didn't see that coming at all. So that was good. I like that. I'm going to have to use that. So I'm going to walk you through just a few things about sort of a global view. You've heard from our speakers about different aspects of security in cloud. You saw the shared responsibility model. You also saw Martin walk you through the IaaS, PaaS, SaaS model and all of that. What I wanted to do is give you maybe a bit of more of a global view of cloud. And to do that, I wanted to just show you sort of what Amazon's AWS's cloud infrastructure looks like to give you an idea when we talk global, what do we really mean? Because these are basic building blocks. In order to understand what AWS really is, you really need to understand those basic building blocks that we're building all of these services on top of. And this is quite different from all the other cloud service providers in the industry and how this has been architected. And so since 2006, when Amazon started AWS, there's been a concept of a region and a concept of an availability zone. So everyone's probably familiar with the data center. So inside of a hyperscale service provider's data centers, you've literally got 1 million plus servers inside one of these data centers. And then each data center has redundant power and network and cooling and all of that stuff to make sure that the data center is resilient in the face of failures inside the data center so that your data is secure and available regardless whether there's a power failure in a rack or cooling failure or whatever. But with AWS, there's also a concept of an availability zone, what we call an AZ. And an AZ is a cluster of data centers. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 data centers in a cluster. And then a region is a cluster of availability zones. So when we come into a region, like Sweden, for instance, where we're going to open up a region, an AWS region this year, that's not building a data center and then 300 miles away from that building another data center. That's literally building a cluster of availability zones, and each availability zone is a cluster of data centers. So it's a huge investment, and it's very different, again, from how other cloud service providers build out their infrastructure. Okay, and so you can see with AWS, we've got 18 regions and 55 availability zones around the world. We've announced Sweden is our newest region, should be available in 2018. And then you can see the list of other announced availability zones and so on. So when we talk about the basic building blocks, when we talk about global, this is really what we mean when we describe the global network. Now, from a global perspective, around compliance. Compliance is really, really important. There's no doubt about it. There's lots of different regulated industries around the world, and there's lots of different regulations that we have to pay attention to. And so you can see this is a subset of the compliance regimes that we have certifications and attestations for. It's sort of a broad reach. You have global certifications, and then you also have regional certifications. And so a global certification is something like ISO 27001. So that's the international standard for security management. Essentially, if you're going to be a global cloud service provider or even a regional cloud service provider, that is table stakes. If you don't have ISO 27001, which is really you're documenting your cybersecurity management plan, If you don't have that written down, documented, and audited, you're going to have customers asking you like why you don't have that, because it's a very basic certification for a cloud service provider to have. And then you can see that there's a whole bunch of other ones here. The one that I sort of describe as the gold standard for cloud service providers is called the SOC 2. So SOC 2 has kind of two flavors, Type 1 and Type 2. Type 1 is when the auditor will come in and look at the architecture and design of your cloud and say, that's architected and designed the way that the cloud service provider says it is. So it's a snapshot of the architecture. And then there's the Type 2, which is where the auditor spends 6 months in the data center watching them manage the service, and then will offer an opinion on whether they're actually managing the service the way they say they're managing the service. Okay, and there's a Type 3, which again is another snapshot version. So the SOC 2 Type 2 is the gold standard because you have auditors in the data center watching each service get operated to a standard and then rendering opinion whether it's actually being operated that way. So SOC 2 Type 2 is really, really hard to get, and it's really hard to get over and over again because you have to recertify every year. So these services that have SOC 2 are literally getting certified constantly because there's a 6-month period, and then it takes them 3 months to do a report. So it takes 9 months to get a SOC 2 Type 2. So these services are constantly being audited for SOC 2 Type 2, in addition to all of the other certifications and attestations that you see. And then from a global perspective, if we go back and we look at all of those data centers again, remember this is what we mean. At AWS, we have over 120 services at this point, and most of those services have SOC 2 Type 2 across this entire infrastructure. So this is what we mean from a global perspective, where we're taking these certifications and attestations that our customers need in order to operate in regulated industries, and we're making all of these control sets and all of the audit reports and all of this stuff available from a global perspective. Because we're not managing each region specifically to regulations just in that region. We're managing them all to a global standard, which, for instance, with GDPR is extremely stringent. And so back in March of this year, we announced that we were going to be GDPR compliant. May 26th came. We're all still here. The sky didn't fall. But it's really important that our customers know that the infrastructure that they're building their applications on top of is already GDPR compliant, because compliance is a chain of trust. And so what we've done is we've already certified that all of that stuff that we talked about with the shared responsibility model, so the data center, the physical security around the data center, all the way up to the racks, all the way up through the hypervisor, all the way up to where you start building your applications on top of, that's already been through GDPR compliance. That's already got ISO 27001, SOC 2 Type 2, like all of the things that you see here, all of those control sets are already there. And that reduces the amount of time and effort it takes you to get those certifications if you need to get them. Okay? And so this approach to what we call security assurance has advantages for organizations, both public sector and commercial sector, where you're already starting on a platform that has all those accreditations. And so if you're dealing with regulators and auditors and so on, it's nice that you already have a head start, because all of that data center infrastructure that you would have had to do on your own is already done for you right when you walk through the door. And it's done, quote unquote, for free, because you're not having to pay IT specialists to do all of that work for you, auditors to come in and audit it, and so on. Okay? And then, obviously, there's a bunch of advantages when it comes to governance and risk and compliance when we focus on security and so on, in that you don't own everything end-to-end anymore. You don't need to. You've essentially delegated responsibility for the physical data centers, for the server racks, for the servers themselves, even for the hypervisor. You've delegated all of that to your service provider. And then you can build on top of that. Now, whether you're using a service like EC2, which is our Elastic Cloud Compute service, which allows you to run virtual machines in our data center instead of your own, or you want to use a higher level service, as you heard Thomas mention earlier about serverless technology, so that would, our serverless technology is called Lambda, which is really code as a service. Instead of you having to order hardware, have it shipped to you, get it off the loading dock, rack it, stack it, power, network, cooling, install an operating system, install a hypervisor, now you can build your application on top of it. You can get to that point with no time at all. If you have a credit card, I can get to that point on an unimaginable scale in minutes. So the paradigm has changed away from months and months of planning and execution and architecture and all of this stuff to literally minutes to get to that point. And then you don't have to take care of this stuff yourself because it's serverless, right? In the case of Lambda, it's literally code running as a service. What that means is instead of you having to run your code on top of all of that server infrastructure, the hardware, the operating system, the hypervisor, you literally take the code that you compiled and linked and built and all of that and ran as an application on top of all that, and you run it in the cloud natively. So that means you don't have to take care of all those servers. You don't have to patch them. You don't have to care about the security. You're just running code in 5-minute intervals, and that's it. You don't care what happens to the infrastructure after that, after you're done with it. It's torn down in a secure fashion. Your data gets stored wherever you want your data stored. You're simply using Lambda as a compute function. Now this gives you some really, really powerful security capabilities in that you can do monitoring and audit continuously. So if you have your own internal standard today that you periodically go and audit against, or if you have a regulated standard that you have auditors come in and audit, imagine a world now, let's fast forward 10 years into the future. Imagine a world where you're continuously auditing against a standard. Okay, one of my favorite lines is, the future's already here. It's just being distributed unevenly. Okay, we can already do that today. We can give you the insight that you could never get before on premise in near real time. So you're literally auditing against a control set, against a standard, in literally real time to see what's changing. And that's because the infrastructure is no longer hardware and all of the stuff that you build on top of it. It's code. So instead of having to install a server from a DVD or from a network share and then wonder what the configuration is, in AWS you install a server from code. You literally run the code and the code deploys the server, configures the server, sets the permissions on the server, the accounts that have access to that server. If you ever want to compare what you have in your environment, just compare it to the code that you use to deploy it. Instantaneously you can see the difference. Okay, that's not even possible on premise today. So this has a lot of security advantages to it. And it allows you to shift away from taking care of servers and hardware and making capital investments in data centers and in having to operate those data centers. This allows you to focus on innovation instead and really taking your organization to the next level. Whoever your organization's customers are, making them more satisfied than they've been before, because you don't have to focus resources on stuff that you've already delegated to a service provider in a way that the managed service provider world could never do, because this isn't a managed service. This is self-service cloud, a very different paradigm. Now, the biggest difference from a security perspective is what we call the central control plane, that API, Application Program Interface. Okay, that API for security people is a game changer. And let me explain why that is. In the on-premise world, in order to secure an on-premise environment, the first thing you have to do, the first challenge you have is inventorying that on-premise environment. You can't manage what you don't know exists, right? You have to be able to measure something in order to manage it. So over the last 30 years, it has been a challenge to get accurate, timely inventory of on-premise estates, because it's based on old-fashioned protocols like SNMP, which, by the way, I used to own when I was at Microsoft, or agents that you have to install in every system, or protocols that these different systems have to speak natively. Okay, there's big challenges with trying to get accurate inventory. But imagine in the cloud, you can get accurate inventory instantaneously. You just query the API, and the API is used to deploy everything. The API is what every command that you send to the cloud goes through. So whether you're using the console in AWS, you're using a command line to run scripts, or you're using applications to interact with the cloud, that all goes through this set of APIs. That makes those APIs a perfect choke point for visibility and control. There is no set of APIs for on-premise. This is a game changer. Now I can see everything that happens inside my cloud, and I can take action on things that happen in there that I don't want to happen. And I can create an audit trail for me, for my auditors, for my security team, for my cybersecurity controls that I never had. It was never possible to do on premise. Okay? So this API stuff is a game changer because it's near real time and you're literally recording everything that happens inside your cloud. So anything that your administrators are doing, if you're worried about insider threat, gets audited. Anything that your users are doing gets audited. Okay, it's all there. Any application that makes an API call, that gets audited. And then you combine this audit trail with something like serverless technology like Lambda. Lambda goes through those logs looking for the events that you care about and taking action on those events automatically based on what you wanted to do when you see those events. This is near real-time audit and self-healing, because if you see something that you don't like or something unexpected, you can write the code to go and actually address it. Okay, so this has never been possible before. So how do you get started? Well, we have a program that for public sector that we call Cloud Start, and you can see some details here. I'm joined by my colleague Sandeep here at the back of the room with the AWS shirt on. He manages this program here, and he's available. He'll be available here after the event to talk with you if you're interested. But essentially, AWS is giving you credits to get started, cloud credits in order to get started in this program. You can see we're working with a lot of different organizations to kickstart this and get things going. But what we found is training is really, really key with cloud adoption. If you go and you decide that you're going to get the cloud and you open up an account, we see that it just sits there stagnant because you're sort of relying on people to come. Now that you've built it, you're relying on people in your organization to come and just learn how to use it. But what we found is we can get really, really fast adoption and make a lot of progress a lot faster through training. And that's why we have programs like this to kickstart that type of training. So I'll just leave you with some URLs there if you're interested in more information. Again, Sandeep is here to answer any questions. All right. Well, thank you very much for your attention this morning.